Well, when it comes time to prepare for the last time, one is never certain as to whether they ought to stay with the standard lectionary reading or perhaps do some reminiscing and looking back. But we're staying with the lectionary reading this morning. It's a great text found in the Gospel of Matthew. And it's one of those texts that it's easy to miss certain nuances about the text that might not be as obvious to a modern listener or as obvious in terms of the translation. We said a few weeks ago when we looked at the Sermon on the Mount that mountains were important to Matthew because Matthew is reaching out to a Hebrew audience. His focus is on the Jewish people, and many of the images he uses and many of the terminology, much of the terminology references the Old Testament. And so today, on this, the last Sunday before Lent, we come to the Mount of Transfiguration, and juxtaposed there are the two accounts. Mountains have always been important as a symbol in the Jewish tradition. That's why Isaiah said, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord that we may walk in his paths." And in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, a mountaintop experience is often referred to as a theophany. The two words meaning theo, meaning God, and from the epiphany, or to enlighten. So it is really an insight into the character and nature of God. Anyone hearing this story for the first time 2,000 years ago would have immediately recalled another mountain, the Mount of Sinai, where Moses went up and for 40 days and 40 nights was on the mountain and then received what we now know as the Ten Commandments. Moses came down that mountain and he had a vision. The New Testament, written years later and focusing in on the life of Jesus in the Gospels, has a similar mountaintop story. That's called the Mount of Transfiguration, and no one is quite certain the exact location of it, although it is thought by scholars to be Mount Tabor, rising about 2,000 feet into the air. It is said in this text that the words, "This is my Son, the beloved, with him I am well pleased, listen to him." And then Peter, impetuous Peter, who's known for speaking up, sometimes without even thinking through, but then we're all guilty of that at times. He says, "It is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Again, scholars have tried to explain exactly what Peter meant by that, and they are not certain. Perhaps it is simply that Peter could not comprehend what was happening. And so he said the first thing that came into his head. You and I have found ourselves in that situation where it is we are not able to comprehend at the moment all that is unfolding. Some of the most precious moments in life are incomprehensible at the moment and at the time. We are not ready for them. And so our response might be like the response of Peter. But when I reference the nuances, Moses is there. And you and I know that Moses was the great lawgiver, representing the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And we know that Elijah was there in that vision. And without question, in the minds of the Hebrew people, the greatest of the prophets. And then the voice, "This is my son, listen to him." Almost in stark contrast to the words of Moses and to the words of the prophets. Jesus would later say, "I came not to destroy or to put aside, but to fulfill that which had been said beforehand." And so the mountain experience has one other little nuance in it. Both of them, if you noticed in the readings, make reference to the 6th or the 7th day. It was on the 7th day that God revealed himself to Moses, and it is after the 6th day that they are on the mountain. It is the Sabbath. This would not be lost. This would not be lost in the mind of the Hebrew reader or listener. Here they are in the quiet place of which the choir sang. They were praying, praying, praying. "This is my beloved, listen to him." The Greek word for listen is multifaceted. And this particular interpretation or text says, keep on listening. It's not a once-for-all listen, but a keeping on listening. And so the text speaks to us today. Not just to disciples long ago, but to people today who struggle with their faith, struggle with their health. Life can be at times a great struggle. There are, as you climb a mountain, rocks and pits, and it can get steep. And there are questions that very few can answer adequately. Why does God allow the faithful to suffer? Why does God allow me to suffer? Why does God allow innocent children? And questions of faith, questions of doubt. I want you to notice that in both of these texts, there is a cloud. The cloud envelops the people. And sometimes we all exist in the cloud. And it is not until later that when the clouds dissipate and when the light shines that the epiphany occurs, the transfiguration takes place. Another interesting aspect of the text, and I'm coming at this kind of at an angle and perhaps not well defined, but another aspect is that when God speaks, he interrupts Peter. It says in the text, and it's making reference to Peter, while Peter was still speaking, God spoke. We have a tendency to not be listeners. We have a tendency at times to just keep on speaking or keep on working. You know, we have some wonderful workers in our churches across this city and across this country. But workers need to take time to reflect and to listen. Up on a mountain, they were praying. Taking time aside when the trail gets steep. God's glory will be revealed, and yet Peter sought not to seize the moment, but he sought to freeze the moment, and you cannot. You cannot freeze the moment, but you can indeed seize the moment. Appreciate it for what it is. Allow its insight to be an inspiration to you and move forward. Perhaps it is a moment in a congregation's life, and we want to freeze it. We can't. Perhaps it is the fond memory of a person or of a program or of a practice, and we want to restore it. We can't. But we can learn from it, and we can move forward with it. Because most of us this morning know a moment of glory when we reflect upon it. It is a great temptation for the church to become a museum. I'm told that in many parts of the world, that's starting to happen in Europe. It's not happening in Asia or South America or Africa, where the church is alive and vibrant. But there is a temptation to become caretakers and divert our energies to the institutionalization of the past, especially those moments of the glory past. But I would say to you this morning in summary, or in closing, that God has so designed our universe that time marches on, but we need to listen to that voice. Someone has written not long ago that in many places around the world, they want to post the Ten Commandments, but few want to post the Beatitudes. Because you see, the Beatitudes challenge us to a life and to a lifestyle that has its roots in the person of Jesus. Someone once asked what the whole purpose of church is. It is spelled out in that text when Andrew comes and brings his brother to some people and asks, "What is it you are looking for?" They said, "We want to see Jesus. We want to see Jesus." And this text in the Gospel of Matthew is a watershed text. It's where the Gospel writer wants us to focus. You see before you Moses, the great giver of the law. You see before you the great prophet Elijah. This is my son. You listen to him, and you keep on listening. That's what would prompt the writer of the Hebrews to say that in days past, God has spoken to us by way of his prophets, but now through his Son. And so you will always find that there is in him no ambiguity and no fault. People will leave churches over many things. They will leave because, I've said before, they may not like the preacher, or they may not like the music, or we meet at the wrong time, or we don't sing the right way. No one leaves because of Jesus. For in him was compassion personified. Caring about everybody, listen to him. And as we move forward in the life of the church, there will be continual transfigurations, consistent changes that take place. Listen, for the church in its doctrinal statements makes reference to the fact that we are a church reformed and always reforming. Nothing in life is static. All things move forward. That is the way that God has designed us to move forward. with the blessed hope and assurance of God's presence, even in the midst of the cloud. And while Peter was yet speaking, God interrupted. Listen. To God's name be the praise and the glory now and forever. Amen.